Good evening, everyone. Good evening, sir. I'm
Mm.
Dr. Meenakshi Ray Ghosh, and today I have the honor on giving you the last lecture of this series. And this is with the Indian diplomatic or foreign policy with African continent. Now, the first question that comes to our mind is why Africa? Now, this is very much like if you see the Economist cover page of the year 2000, you will see that the Economist has said Africa as a hopeless continent. But come to 2011, there was a complete U-turn where it said that Africa is rising. Now, Africa is very, very important in today's foreign policy perspective of India. And this is not something very new because the Indian relations with Africa has been have a long historical roots. For example, for many centuries, the two parts of the world, like India and Africa, has interacted not only in levels of economic, political, as well as socio-cultural practices. Now, economically, there have been trade transactions in both natural and human resources. Some of the natural resources which of trade included cotton, spices, and other food products. And the human resources items of trade, especially was when the African traders, African slaves, crossed the Indian Ocean to parts of Asia, including India. Now, politically, India, just like many other African countries, was a British colony. Now, for over 2 centuries, Indian fight for independence was led by Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, among others, leading to Indian independence inspired by many African nationalists. Now, the newly independent government, when India freed herself from the colonial shackles of the British, they inspired many African nationalists, and then the newly independent Indian government also helped African nationalist movements to achieve their goals. On the socio-cultural scene, there have been exchange in ideas, educational opportunities, medicine, drugs, equipments over the years. Now, when India attained independence in 1947, August, the then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru made its government's priority very clear that India wanted to create a friendly, cooperative, and mutually constructive relationship between, between his government and those of the African countries, which were newly gaining independence. To achieve this, what he did was he fully supported the African nationalist movements and also the uh, political parties. Now, the India was one of the key organizers of the Asian African Conference, which was held in 1955. Now, this was held in Bandung, Indonesia. At that conference, India and other members of the non-aligned members committed themselves to do three things. Firstly, was to promote trade, economic development, and cooperation with the African countries. And secondly, to enhance the development of cultural cooperation between the Asian and African countries, some of which was hampered for centuries by colonial rule. And lastly, they all the non-allied countries agreed to promote the extension of human rights and self-determination for the African countries. They argued that the denial of independence to these African countries is is basically denying the Africans the right to dignity. So, as the African countries started gaining independence from 1956 onwards, the Indian government also did not hesitate to establish formal diplomatic relations with these newly independent countries. And also, the African countries, on the other hand, equally reciprocated India's gesture. Now, then comes the 60s and the 70s. You must remember that this foreign relationship with India and Africa comes in stages. This is the period from the Indian independence from 1947 to say basically the start of 1960s. Now, 1960s and 70s, there were certain other issues which came regarding the Indian foreign relationship with Africa. Now, first there were economic issues, then there were common developmental challenges, and also a need of the new international economic order, which brought India closer to the African countries. Now, but one thing which was very noticeable was, even though in various international forums, the African countries as well as India was speaking about South-South cooperation, but it was basically notional because the volume of trade between India and Africa remained very low. Now, India again began looking in the coherent fashion in the late 1970s because of the renewed economic and diplomatic interest. And the first India-Africa summit was held in 1980. And this resulted in the Delhi Declaration, which laid out a very ambitious framework for the relationship, which covered broad angles. Say, for example, trade and investment, development assistance, cooperation in a number of global fields, including climate change, terrorism, and reform of multilateral organizations. Now, the end of Cold War, in the post-Cold War era, we find that there was decolonization of Namibia and also the end of apartheid rule in South Africa. So what happened was that there was a total paradigm shift in the Indian foreign policy with Africa, because the main political and the ideological agenda that brought the Africans and the Indian together had literally vanished. So the shared ideologies of non-alignment, disarmament, though was still advocated, but they were not the rallying point of interaction. And then in India, the economic liberalization started in 1991. So Indian foreign policy moved away from being ideological driven to it became very pragmatic. From this time, India started using the word economic diplomacy. So you realize that I had started from 1947 to the start of 1960. Then you have 60s to early 70s, 70s to 80s. Then and then the 90s. You have a total shift in the post-Cold War era because the notion of economic development was started, and India was starting to woo the African countries from the economic point of view. Now, in 1993, the Indian government stated that in future, new relationships will be based on economic, technological, as well as enhanced educational cooperation. And these 3 points were the main importance of the agenda. Manmohan Singh, the then Prime Minister of India, pointed out that Africa as a mother continent. So this marked a third phase in the Indian engagement with Africa. Now, in the past few years, we see that India has come to redefine Africa policy once more. Now, what is developing between the two is assuming the contours of a strategic partnership. I have spoken earlier about the 90s, where you have economic diplomacy, then comes strategic partnership. And in other words, the relationship has become very much holistic with India. For example, Indian interest in Africa now include diplomatic as well as security elements. This is the first time we find the security elements which was not seen before. And it is a much more long term because Delhi was interested in developing a deep, diversified and a very lasting relationship with a increasingly large number of African countries. Now, in the past, India spoke of leading the developed world, but today, India does not say that. India stresses the idea of equal partnership. And our present Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he said that the 21st century is owned both by the Asia and Africa. And he said that India and India and Africa have similar sized population, and so both sides can basically learn from innovation and accomplishments from one another. And basically, it is something of equal partnership. Now, the first element which brought about the change in the relationship was the Indian trade with Africa. Now, the bilateral trade, which was uh, almost 34 billion in 2008 2009, has jumped tremendously. And now India is among the third largest trading partner with Africa. This now India has also surpassed Japan and United States, but it is behind China and the European Union. Now Africa is now a larger part of India, and Africa is also the fifth largest source of foreign direct investments, although it retains a larger government uh, component than trade. Now, the second shift, which is the diplomatic front. Now, with greater African recognition of India's potential role as a partner and a global player, we see in the international scenario when in New Delhi was canvassing for support for permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, the Indian diplomats were struck by how much support it received from the African governments, many of whom they see India as one of the natural candidate for promotion in the intergovernmental organization than compared to Germany or Japan. So this emphasizes how much Africa and India value each other. Now, there have been various instances in other multilateral forums like climate change and other summits where African states were seen taking the Indian side. Now, the, th- the third shift, and another thing I must mention is that you must know that there were three Indo-African Forum summits. The first was held in New Delhi in 2008. Then in 2011, there was the second summit, and the last summit, which was held in 2015 in New Delhi. This showed that all the 54 African countries had sent their representatives, most of them at the highest level, to this forum summit. So this shows, or rather emphasizes, how much India is in the eyes of the African continent. Then comes the third shift, which I said, security. Now, the India-Africa relationship is the development of security relationship. Now, India have very number of military relationships with African countries, and this goes back almost to the days when it opposed apartheid in South Africa. But in the past few years, it has signed a number of military and security cooperation agreements with a dozen of African countries. Now, for instance, India provides training and funding of the Sahelian government to help them fight violent extremism. However, what has been more important is Delhi's desire to develop a comprehensive sphere of influence in the Indian Ocean region. Now, the question that comes now is why the Indian Ocean region? Now, the Indian Ocean region is one of the most important regions, even though the Indian Ocean is the third largest ocean in the world. Now, the the sea lines of communication, which passes through Africa, is very important because the two economic powerhouses, which is having aggressive development, is China and India. Now they need oil, gas, and the maritime sea routes pass through that region. So it is very important to keep the shipping lanes, or you may call it SLUG in its abbreviated form, or the sea lines of communication, to be very secure. And also it is of economic interest to various countries. Also, you must remember that through the Horn of Africa is also very important in the sense that the oil from the Persian Gulf passes through this region to Europe and America. If you recall an incident, which I say how important is this sea lanes of communication, like in the last year in March, when a merchant ship MS Evergreen was grounded in the Suez Canal, in one of the canals, like it created a major ripple in the maritime traffic. because everything was stuck. And today, the 80% of the global trade and everything goes through the maritime traffic. And also, India is also cultivating a very significant presence in the Western Indian Ocean. Now, what is the Western Indian Ocean? Now, the Western Indian Ocean has certain countries like Mozambique, Mauritius, Madagascar, Seychelles, Comoros. Now, China is also equally cultivating these relationships. Now, what is more important is that though India cannot compete with China, because Indian foreign policy, like many scholars criticize that it was a policy of sea blindness, because they were mainly giving more advantage to the land continental thing. But later on, India decided that it cannot sit back and take a laid back attitude. And so it started an aggressive to find a strong foothold in the Indian Ocean region. Remember, China has way ahead and is trying to secure a very strong footholds in the Indian Ocean region. So India is also trying to do that, and so that this is one of the main reasons. Like it has, for example, a listening post in Madagascar. So it was set up way back in 2008 2009. Now this listening post was connected with the naval station of Kochi. So this is very much necessary and very much important for the maritime surveillance. And that time, you must remember, 2008 was the time when Somali piracy was at its heights. So also India had also played a very important role in Somali piracy. You must remember in 2008 there was a continuous attack on Indian ships. So the Indian Navy used to send its naval ships to sort of safeguard the ships so that it can cross the Somali waters and can sail forward. And not only India had given this sort of guarding thing to the Indian ships, it has also saved the ships from flying the flag of other countries. And this was very much commendable from the international community. Now, coming back, I say that the India's concerns is solely on how much India contributes to the African countries. Now, it depends on both the civil society as well as the governmental level. Now, a fourth shift is that India is now wanting to is developing a multi-layered relationship with some strategically important African countries in the same manner which the Western powers has done in the past and China is also doing today. But India's capacity is limited in the sense that there is always sometimes a lack of coordinated policy coordination. Now, an example where countries are expanding ties, I said that India has established its listening post in Madagascar. Then in Mozambique, it is a very strategic Indian Ocean littoral state, and it's located in the Western Indian Ocean. Now, so it has a very important ties with Mozambique. Then also Indian companies we see, both private and state-owned, has invested in the country's energy resources, and to the point that roughly a quarter of India's total FDI goes to continental Africa, goes to Mozambique today. But India also trains some of the African countries' military, its intelligence services, and it has a number of aid and training programs. Now, finally, the latest component to all these elements has been the India's hunt for third country partners to assist in its program in Africa. As previously mentioned, India had many capacity constraints when it came to implementing its multi-layered development partnership across the continent. One of the restrictions was finance. It has also undersized the diplomatic core and the domestic policy that is easily distracted by internal issues. But a strategic influence has come to infuse its policy. This has partly risen mainly because of the Chinese influence, but ultimately this is borne by the broader recognition that a rising India must be much more engaged with its larger neighborhood. And New Delhi can and should seek partnership with other countries whose own geopolitical interest shows such a large convergence. Now, in 2015, we see that India highlighted its continued commitment to India-Africa partnership by making available almost $10 billion in concessional loans and lines of credit to the African countries, while also doubling grant assistance. Unlike the developed world donors, Indian assistance is predicated on the underlying principle of true partnership. Now, in addition to concessional loans, grant assistance, India aid programs also include provisions for technical assistance, scholarship and training, and human resources development, and also and as a true value of the assistance program is possible when there is a large pool of private capital. So development partnership between India and Africa has also already helped to create a bridge for private capital, with over 50% of the India's overseas private sector investments now currently going to Africa. While investments have not only gone to the development oriented projects, additional stimulus is also provided to the community along the ancillary benefits, and this have also helped in increasing the living standards of the African countries. Now, as the volume of investment increases, now private capital will start to flow, and these projects are directly linked to SDG. What is SDG? It is Sustainable Development Goals. This includes, this was developed by the United Nations, which said there were 17 broad areas like zero poverty, then zero hunger, clean air, clean water, sanitation, and all these comes under this SDG. And this provides direct benefits to the African countries. Now, in fact, finding methods to increase global private capital involvement could be one of the key to India and Africa countries to achieve these sustainable development goals. Now, Indian Africa engagement, I have always been continually emphasizing, is now a multi-layered engagement. Apart from trade, India has undertaken a number of investment projects in Africa. Now, these investments are not only limited to the energy sector, it spans diverse sectors such as pharmaceuticals, IT, telecommunication, agriculture, and this is not only led by the government institutions. You have a host of private sectors also playing a very important role in the African continent. Now, for example, you have the Vedanta resources. Some of the examples I'm saying. It's not possible to give all the examples due to the paucity of time. Vedanta resources have invested in copper mines in Zambia. ONGC, the Oil and Natural Gas Commission Videsh, has invested equity assets in Sudan, Nigeria, Libya. The Tata Group in engineering and the information technology sectors. And similarly, Indian firm as Bharti Airtel has acquired 10 billion African assets in the telecom giant Xi'an in 2010. So investment has also been made in a vast array of sectors like agriculture and water management. You have heard of the Kirloskar brothers and the Mahindra. They have made their presence felt in a number of African countries. Now, Indian companies have always shown a willingness to transfer knowledge in key areas, such as chemicals. Like this, one of the examples I give here is in Uganda. For example, the state-owned chemicals, it was the quality chemicals. Now they have tied up with Indian Cipla, this being an example of a joint venture, and also how much enables value additions. The increasing number of business delegations which are traveling to and fro from Africa, business conclaves in India, suggests that India is a very important stakeholder in the African development. India's engagement with Africa is unique because it is said, India has always said that it believes in mutual benefit while contributing to the African development objectives through a consultative process. In the words of a former Indian minister, he said that India do not wish to go and demand certain rights and project in Africa, but what they want to do is to contribute to the achievement of African development and objectives. So this is one of the very key salient features of India's foreign policy with Africa. Now, the development cooperation, as I said, that India has also taken various initiatives to deepen this engagement with Africa. Now, these include the Exim Bank's Focus Africa policy. This was initiated way back in 2002 to deepen trade ties with African countries and to enhance cooperation with the West African region. The Indian government has launched a techno-economic approach for the India-Africa movement, which is basically called the TEAM. Now, in partnership with 8 countries in the region. Now, what are these 8 countries? These are Burkina Faso, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Ghana, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire. Now, the TEAM initiative envisages transfer of critical technologies from India to the region, and also Indian development cooperation also seeks to enhance inter as well as intra-African connections. Now, the primary example is the Pan-African e-network. I will be further telling you in details about this Pan-Africa e-network. And this seeks to enable the African capacity building through e-learning, online medical consultations, and this seeks to overcome the barriers to learning and promote public health in the continent. Now, India recognizes the diversity within the African continent, and in that spirit, India's current engagement with Africa is at this 3 levels. One is bilateral, one is regional, and the other is Pan-African. So at the Pan-African level, I have said that India has hosted 3 summits, 2008, 2011, and 2015. And the 2015, you can understand how much the importance I have said previously the African countries gave, because all the 54 countries had sent high-level delegations to this summit. Now, following the India-Africa summit, apart from unveiling the 5.7 billion line of credit for Africa, now India had undertaken a slew of signature initiatives that distinguished what India has always been saying. It wanted a development-centric approach to Africa. So it announced a setting up of 80 capacity building institutions across the continent, as well as for scholarship for African students. Now, these institutions encompass following areas ranging from agriculture, rural development, food processing, information technology, vocational training, in English language centers, and also entrepreneurial development institutes. Now, these institutes will be in addition to the 19 training centers, which was already started way back in March 2010 by India as a part of the action plan. And these will be set up in consultation with the African countries at the Pan-African, regional, and bilateral level. Now, these the Indo-Africa food processing culture And India-Africa integrated textile cultures were also introduced in this summit of 2015, and they were the one of the main primary reasons for announcing this was enhancing the industrial capacity. Now, another set of institutes have already been set up to boost the African agrarian culture sector. These include India-Africa Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting and India-Africa Institute for uh, Rural Development. Now, India has also unveiled plans to set up India-Africa Virtual University, and at the same time, the 22,000 scholarships have been announced for African students. So this is also the main reason is that it also wants to enhance the skill of the African youth and are the centerpiece of its current engagement with Africa today. Now, firstly, I have said that the trade is one of the most important sectors because initially the trade with India and Africa was very low. But now India and Africa is India is the third largest trading partners with Africa, and Indian imports from Africa overtook Indian exports to Africa much faster. So the growth of trade is mainly because of the rise of energy imports. Now the import of mineral fuels and lubricants from Africa has grown tremendously, and oil imports from Africa now account for 18% of India's total imports. Now, Nigeria and Angola are the largest source of oil producing in Africa, and there are concurrent increase in the demand for refined petroleum products of Indian exports to Africa. Now, exports of refined petroleum products currently account for 10% of India's export because India has surplus refining capacity. But whereas when you contrast it with Africa, now Africa has very limited capacity. So that is one of the reasons that India is exporting refined petroleum products. Now, apart from oil, Africa is also an important source of coal, natural gas, and uranium. Now, South Africa and Mozambique here, I will say that is one of the very important sources of coal for India. Then you, on the other hand, you have Algeria, Nigeria, Egypt, which are source of natural gas. And uranium, the countries which support uranium to India are Niger, South Africa, are some of the countries, and also Namibia. And there is also a marked increase in agricultural trade between India and Africa. Now, we see that about 50, and also beef, sugar, fish are one of the most important agricultural exports from India to Africa. Now, almost 50% of India's beef products are destined for Africa. In recent years, East African countries have also become large exporters of pulses to India, which is why, because pulses are a major source of protein for a vast percentage of the population of India. And now, in its main agricultural imports from Africa, on the other hand, for India is shelled cashew, vegetables, nuts, which is dried or fresh, coffee, tea, spices. Now, India also imports gold, coal, copper concentrates from South Africa. And also Egypt, top 5 imports from India are mineral fuel, frozen meat, electrical machinery, cotton, and motor. Now, it is not possible for me to tell you in details all the countries because of the paucity of time. I'm saying the main. Now, there's a very interesting development which recently took place, I think today, because of the impact of the Ukrainian and the war. Like Egypt was importing wheat, 80% of the import of wheat was coming from Russia and Ukraine. Now, Egypt has now decided to import wheat from India because India has readily agreed to supply wheat to Egypt. So this is one of very, you can say, a positive development in the trade between India and Africa. Now, also the Indian technology shift is also very high. Now, next, I will come to the energy sector, which is very important. Now, both Indian public and private sector companies have made inroads in the energy sector. Now, ONGC Videsh is one of the most active Indian company in Africa. It has 5 exploration projects. Now, one is in Libya, 2 in Nigeria, 1 in Egypt, and 1 is in the Joint Development Zone. Now, what is the Joint Development Zone? Now, Joint example zone is an area which has an overlapping maritime boundary between Nigeria as well as Sao Tome and Principe. Now, Sao Tome and Principe, earlier was a Portuguese slave outpost, but currently it is one of the main exporters of sugarcane, coffee, cocoa products. So, other public sectors company in Africa, you have the Oil India Limited, the Bharat Petroleum, the Indian Petroleum. These companies have also made investments in Libya, Egypt, Nigeria, Mozambique, etc. Now, many Indian in 2015, the ONGC Videsh Limited have also acquired 20% stake in the Rovuma gas block, and the International Coal Ventures Private Limited, a consortium of Steel Authority of India, National Thermal Corporation of Limited. These have also acquired stakes in the African continent. Now, after energy, another important areas of investment for India in Africa is agriculture. Now, 80 Indian companies have invested almost $2.3 billion in Ethiopia, Kenya, Madagascar, Senegal, and Mozambique. Now, most of the African countries have encouraged this growth of Indian private sector through business-friendly policies, because Indian seed farms are experimenting in a production of hybrid seeds of millet, rice, maize, vegetables in Africa. Now, some of the notable seed companies of India, which is active in Africa, is JK Seeds. You have Namdhari Seeds, Bhiva Seeds, Nath Seeds, and companies like KBL are also playing an important role in the African irrigation sector. Now, some African countries have also offered land on lease to Indian farmers. And some of the Indian farmers have also migrated to these countries, like the Karuturi Global Limited and the Shiva Group. Now, these two companies of India have acquired large tracts of agricultural land in Africa, and they have received a favorable response. But on the other hand, there is always a flip side of the coin. Like the Karuturi Global company have been criticized severely because they have acquired large-scale land acquisition, and also there is a complete disregard for environmental as well as livelihood issues. Now, India has also a very important cooperation in science and technology. This is another sector which is given very much emphasis today. Now, scientific and technological cooperation is one of the most important cooperation with Africa since 1960s. Now, India had launched the India Economic Cooperation, and this was launched with providing technical assistance to partner countries of Africa. Now, the scope of scientific cooperation with Africa has been widened recently. And in the last decade, especially, like the Department of Science and Technology has been implementing a large number of programs and activities in the India-Africa Science and Technology Initiative. For example, the C.V. Raman Fellowship has been announced for African researchers from 2010. And this is one of the main initiatives of this C.V. Raman Fellowship was It provided an opportunity for the African researchers to engage in collaborative research in science and technology with the Indian institutions and universities, and also under eminent Indian scientists. Now, so far, over 164 candidates from African countries have been awarded this fellowship. Now, the Department of Science and Technology is also providing technical assistance to the African institution uh, engaged in research and development. Now, I have also spoken earlier of the Pan-African E-Network. Now, what was the Pan-African E-Network? I have said that it aimed at one of the main objective of this network was to narrowing the digital divide between Africa and harnessing the socio-economic benefits of information. Now, India has, under this program, set up a fiber optic network to provide satellite connectivity, telemedicine, teleeducation to African countries. Now, also, like there is the total value of the project is estimated as rupees 452 crores. Now, what are the key dimensions? So we have said that some of the key dimensions are energy, security, food security, and the diaspora links. Now, food security, I said earlier that one of the key themes this was the key theme of the 2008 first Indo-Africa summit. And India is playing an important role in augmenting the sort of food, the common challenges which is faced by Africa, like hunger, undernutrition, low productivity of agriculture, etc. So, two institutions like the India Crop Research Institute for the semi-arid tropics and the International Livestock Research Institute play a very important role in achieving this. Now, why should India be interested in Africa? So, present mega trends in Africa are supportive of Indian trade and investments in the region. Africa has a large working age population, a growing middle class, and a significant share of services are all ingredients for value-adding trade and investment relationship. Now, next, what is the way forward? Like in the late 20th century and the early 21st century, so India has utilized long-term relation to take advantage of Africa economically as well as geopolitically. Now, Afghan government, on the other hand, has found a very reliable partner in India through its continued support, economic, political, and socio-cultural arena. So it emphasizes the, and also India has constantly emphasized that it is believes in equal partnership, and also it is a multi-layered foreign policy, and which is like they are with various institutions, and this has also allowed India to boost economic development and national security, and at the same time it is allowing India to maintain economic and political ties with the African state. Now, in security matters, India have also assisted African countries in fighting terrorism and through the provision of arms training, military personnel, etc. Now, India has participated in a number of United Nations peacekeeping operations, and lately it has also participated through the support of the African Union. Now, one of the now comes the figures. You can understand how important India in the Indian role is in peacekeeping in Africa. Now, India has contributed nearly 185,000 troops, the largest by any countries, for 48 UN peacekeeping missions around the world. And about approximately 70% of the UN peacekeepers worldwide have been deployed in Africa. And 50% of the peacekeeping operations in the post-Cold War area has taken in the region. Now, India has participated in missions for Congo in 60-64, then Namibia 89-90, and South Sudan 2005, Congo 2005, Ivory Coast 2004. So it has, Indians have also taken leadership role like force commanders, police commissioners, as well as military and police advisors in various UN missions. Now, one of the Indian contribution towards peace in Africa is unique in terms of professionalism. Not only professionalism, it's also the humanitarian value that India brings with its peacekeeping force because of the promotion of gender equality. And gender equality, how? Now, there's a very wonderful example, like to promote where India tried to promote gender equality and sensitivity when it led a peacekeeping motion, peacekeeping thing in Liberia in 2007. Now, it sent 125 female Central Reserve Police Force members. So this was the first time a all women unit was sent for UN peacekeeping. Now, one of the results was that this presence of so many female police units in the country, this inspired several Liberian women to join the police force and participate in maintaining law and order. And this development is not a mean feat. And also, like Indian troops in various peacekeeping missions have also believed in strong community relations through their humanitarian activity, because they have also medical units where the Indian doctors provided vital assistance, performed eye surgeries, etc. But India also paid a heavy price and it has lost a number of peacekeeping members. Now, currently, India calls for greater cooperation between the United Nations as well as the African Union. Now, African Union now has maintains peace and security also uh, in the region, and India has extended its full support now to the continent. Now, this forces had become operational, the Asian African peace and security architecture of the African Union. Now, this force was there where African Union, if it feels that if any country, any internal strife of a country is threatening the stability of the region, then it can send troops. And also, if certain member states ask for African Union's help, then it will deliberate and will try to provide help to all. Now, next we come to the very important thing is diaspora. Now, what is diaspora? Now, Indians have been visiting the African continent till ages. Now, a diaspora in Indian diaspora in Africa is almost estimated to encompass almost 3 million people spread across the continent. Now, Indian diaspora has two groups of people. Now, please don't confuse between the two. One is the NRIs and one is the PIO. NRIs are non-resident Indians, which they have emigrated to the country presently where they are staying, the foreign countries. Now, people of Indian origin are those who have ancestors in India, but they were born and brought up in the host country and they have citizenship of that country. Now, further, now Prime Minister Modi has recently given very much emphasis on this role of the diaspora, because it feels that the diaspora plays a very important role in the foreign policy of any country by trying to influence the country. Now, for example, there is a Nakumat chain, supermarket chain in the African Great Lakes. Now, what is the African Great Lakes? It loosely encompasses the region where the main Lake Tanganyika, Lake Victoria, Lake Edward, Albert is there. And these basically encompass the countries of Burundi, Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Northwest Kenya, and Tanzania. Now, this supermarket chain is owned by Atul Shah family, and this has a revenue in excess of $450 million. So you can understand that if a person of his stature, of Atul Shah or any of his family members, they have an important say in the foreign policy of the continent. And also, there are various professionals of Indian origin in virtually every African state. Now, again, there are also criticisms like the Indian diaspora. Some say that the Indian government is not doing much to engage the African diaspora. Much needs to be done. And the Indian diaspora is very special in Africa because it has contributed to the skill and development of the country of adoption, integrated with the local people. And furthermore, it is also seen that in Indian government is no longer sort of ignorant about the success and activities of the people of Indian origin. So they have also a very significant role in the contribution of the Africa policy in India. Next comes the health sector. Now, India is said to be the pharmacy of the world. Now, this was very much evident during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, Indian Africa Development Cooperation in the health sector is there is very much prominent because they have earlier sent drugs to combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, TB, and other infectious diseases. Now, the Indian firm Cipla has supplied antiretroviral medicines for HIV/AIDS treatment to African countries at a very minimal cost. Now, also there are other pharmaceutical firms like Ranbaxy Laboratories. They are very much active in Africa today. Now, with the now coming to the COVID-19 pandemic, we see that there were a lot of maximum cases which was reported in South Africa, which was almost 1.5 million, which was followed by Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, Nigeria. Now, at the very outset, India maintained contact with countries in the region and exchanged information for the management of this pandemic. Now, India also, on the other hand, was facing a major battle of its own within fighting COVID-19. But the country also demonstrated its capacity to support the partner countries. Like initially, during the first phase of COVID-19, India had supplied paracetamol tablets, test kits, and other medicinal equipments to various countries, almost various countries. And this included 25 from Africa. So the Indian Defense Forces also played a key role in implementing the country's health cooperation initiative with the African continent. Now, under the Mission Sagar initiative, like Indian naval ship INS Kesari supplied COVID-related relief to Mauritius, the Seychelles, Madagascar, Comoros, and similarly under Mission Sagar 2, the Indian naval ship Aryavat sailed to Sudan, South Sudan, Djibouti, and Eritrea with medicines and materials to fight against natural calamities as well as the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, such mission is basically aligned with Prime Minister Modi's vision of Sagar. What is Sagar? You all know that it is security and growth for all in the region. This was highlighted the importance accorded by India to relations with its maritime neighbors. Now, among this, India said that not only its immediate maritime neighbors, it also should include Africa. So this shows how much importance India is giving to Africa. Now, the Vaccine Mantri initiative was also launched in the line of Indian philosophy that the world is one family, and it was flagged by Prime Minister Modi during the Vaccine Summit of June 2020. Now, as the largest vaccine producing country in the world, India gifted millions of doses of COVID vaccine to the countries across the world, including Africa. Now, Seychelles was the first country to receive the Indian made vaccines. Now, when India started to roll out the pandemic diplomacy with the African countries, there were also various challenges it faced. Like either they were trying to hijack the consignment or support trying to supply fake vaccines. Like many Chinese nationals were arrested when they were trying to supply fake vaccines to the African countries under the name of Made in India. Now, this is in a gist, you can say that these are the main tenets of India's foreign policy with Africa. Now, coming to another point which I have missed out is while I was speaking about the diaspora in Indian diaspora in Africa, I have you heard about the Siddhis or the Sedis in India? Now, these are the Bantu tribes of Southeast Africa, which had come to India way back in 11,000. They were mainly brought by the Portuguese as slaves. Now, they mainly, there are about 40 to 50,000 according to the population census. There are 40 to 50,000 cities in India. Now, they mainly reside in Karnataka and Gujarat, and also you'll find a scattering in Goa, Maharashtra, Telangana, etc. So if you see the cities, what I'm trying to say is that the relationship with Africa is not today. It is a long time, not only trade, as I mentioned in my first starting, but also human resources. Like the cities are very much an example. If you see them, they have never been to Africa, but they speak us. They play the African drums. They are totally African looking, but even though the language they speak is mostly Konkani or Marathi, where those who are staying in Maharashtra, and it is a very wonderful example of the deep rooted human relationship with India and Africa had through decades. Now, India is one of the most economic powerhouse in Africa, in Asia, sorry, comparing with China. And so Africa is also a very rising continent and the place, one of the most happening space. Now, it is also said there's a scramble for Africa. Now, what is a scramble for Africa? Now, scramble for Africa is often termed by various foreign researchers as saying a form of new colonialism where everyone is scrambling to sort of trying to put their hands on African minerals and all sort of wealth which is with the African countries. And that too, and also oil and gas. Remember, this is very much important today. And also, I have also mentioned the security angle, like Africa, the shipping lanes pass through the African continent. So it is very important for the security of all the nations, not only India, to keep the sea lines of communication safe. And also the Indian Ocean is very much important. And there's a statement which I must make is that the Indian Ocean is the center stage of 21st century politics. So this is very much important in the strategic thinking of India. Now, India, as I said, that India had suffered a policy of sea blindedness initially because it was mainly the policy was continental or land based. Now, India had overcome that and is trying to gain a foothold and trying to sort of have a wonderful relationship with all the Indian Ocean countries of Africa. So that's all in a nutshell because it's a vast topic and it is very difficult to put it in 1 hour. But I have put up the main tenets of Indian foreign policy with Africa, and the 54 countries and India share a wonderful partnership And the partnership, which I stress continuously, is multi-layered and also multifaceted and is equal partnership. India does not believe in dominating. India believes in economic equal partnership and also contributing to the development of uh, the African community and the different countries of Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Meenakshi, for having covered almost all the aspects of relations of India with a vast continent like Africa, with 54 countries. It's not very easy to summarize, right beginning from the historical times and all that. So before I ask the students to ask questions, I would like to supplement what you have thought in very brief. One is that we have Indian diaspora in Africa, and Africans claim and they boast that you sent Gandhi to Africa, but we made him a Mahatma. So, India's relations with Africa has been right from our, war of independence against British people. So, from there on, you can say that our relations have been there. Secondly, so far as India's relations with the African countries are concerned, India has always been against apartheid. And, the South Africa, renowned cricketing nation was banned for almost 20 years from international cricket. And in 1991, they were allowed to, when a mixed team of players from Africa were allowed to come to India. So India was the first to host a cricket match, a test match at Eden, Calcutta, and we have always supported this, principle of fight against apartheid and all that. Second thing is, this is very relevant in the case of Africa. They have a very large number of states. Now it's 54. These 54 or a large number of countries have always been very, very dear to major powers to keep their hold in international politics. I just give one example. US did not allow communist regime in China to sit in the Security Council. For 25 years, they did not allow the communist representative in Security Council. And you know what they used to say? They used to boast that we have not used veto. US said that we have never used veto, but we have used votes. And where the votes came from? They came from Africa. Africa and bloc supported US on the boycott of communist regime sitting in the Security Council. Then China also learned a lesson, and I think I remember 54 or 55 Chinese Premier Chu Enlai. He made a very hectic and very lengthy tour of Africa. He was there for almost 55 days. I mean, knowing that it is with the support of this number of African states, the US has not allowed us to enter the Security Council. And from then, you can say the relationship between communist regime in China and African states began. So African states, simply because of their numerical strength, they are, very dear to the major powers. And so is the case with India. India has also traditional relationship, cultural relationship, historical relationship, diaspora is there, but we value their, importance in international politics. So that's why India all the time keeps an eye on the support of African states. That's why these, Africa Summit and all these things have been taking place. So with that note, I will ask the students to put any questions to you. Now, please go ahead with the questions.
Good evening, ma'am. Am I audible? Yeah, first of all, thank you for such insightful session. I am Anushka. I'm a final year mass media student from Jain College, Mumbai. So, I want to ask you like something on the lines of what you mentioned about Indian Ocean region.
Yeah.
So, so we are seeing that in the growing years, the rivalry between India and China it's playing out in many fields. So one of those is Indian Ocean region. So both countries are trying to gain hold of it through trade. So what is your perspective? What is your opinion from that perspective on India-Africa relations?
Thank you so much, Anushka. Now, this is a very important question regarding Indian foreign policy, especially the policy of the Indian Ocean region compared with Africa. Now, you must remember firstly that India was a bit late because the Indian policymakers suffered from what the critics always said, policy of sea blindedness. Like they had always looked upon history where all the invasions were mainly land based. Now, China went way ahead, like though it is not very relevant here, but it is relevant to understand what I'm trying to emphasize, like the string of pearls policy of China. Now, what is the string of pearls policy? This is a term which was coined by an American researcher in way back in 2004. Now, string of pearls, the one pearl is one port which is of immense strategic importance in the Indian Ocean. Like you have the Gwadar port in Pakistan, the Chittagong in Bangladesh, then you have the Hambantota in Sri Lanka. And then you have the Myanmar port. So when you sort of hypothetically link them, they become a string of pearls. And this is very important because India has always considered the Indian Ocean as its backwater. And so it had a very laid back attitude. But when there was the Indian Ocean started gaining importance and the research, everybody was trying to gain a foothold in the Indian Ocean region. Like say, for example, in Eastern Africa, the state of Djibouti, like, like the United States have a naval base there. Japan also, France also has a naval base there. And United States have set up an African command, specially to look into this, so you can understand the importance this region plays. So India is always trying to sort of, now India cannot compete with China. It is not possible because it is way ahead. Like while I have said that the Indian foreign policy or Indian relationship with Africa, even though it is multi-layered, but it is based on equal partnership. It wants to include the community, but China has almost sort of taken almost in one project you will find almost a mini China there. So what is happening is India is now have to think strategically how to gain its foothold, how to become more important in the Indian Ocean region, because not only it is important for the shipping lanes, where either you say shipping lanes or you say sea lines of communication or slope or whatever terminology you use. Shipping lanes is very much important. When I have given you the example of MS Evergreen, when it got grounded, it created a ripple in the maritime world. Now, Somalia piracy, for example. So, Somalia piracy, like the whole world, now this is a non-traditional security threat. Now, threats you remember are two types: traditional security threats and non-traditional security threats. Now, according to researchers or many political scientists or international researchers, they feel that today traditional, non-traditional security threats are much more important. These include piracy, these include HIV/AIDS, then human trafficking, unregulated shipping, climate change. All these constitute to the instability of a region. Now, for Somali piracy, why all the nations of the world frantically sent their ships to keep to safeguard the that area? Mainly because to protect their trade. And as I said, that most of the maritime trade passed through the Indian Ocean. Indian Ocean, even though it is the third largest ocean, it is crisscrossed by shipping lines. Now, India is trying to overcome that by having military relations with different countries. It is especially sort of cultivating the West Indian Ocean, because West Indian Ocean countries like Comoros, Madagascar, Mauritius, Seychelles, these are very, very important strategically. I have always also said that it has a listening post in Madagascar. Now, this is directly linked to the Naval Command of Kochi. So you can understand how much importance India tries to play and is trying to overcome. Now, it also so the military, it trains the military of various countries. And I have also given example of peacekeeping missions. So by various types of, they are trying to overcome this sort of lopsided policies which initially harmed the India. But now India is also very much an important partner in the Indian Ocean region, and they are the Indian Navy is also like very much active in that region, and it is Indian Ocean is now the one of the important points in the Indian Africa foreign policy thinkers. I hope you are clear, Anushka.
Yes. Next question. Yes. Be quick. So with that, I think things have been explained in detail, very exhaustively. Nothing left for questions, and they seem to be satisfied with the presentation. So, Dr. Meenakshi, thank you very much for having spared time for this presentation. Very rich, I think, full of informative content, and a wonderful picture of India-Africa relationship. And I hope we'll continue to have your guidance and your help in taking this initiative to further its progress. So thank you very much. And with your permission, I would like to end this.
Yeah, so I like to add 2 points. Thank you so much, students, for listening to me. And also the Institute of Foreign Policy Research have brought a number of books. There's a book on Nigeria which was edited by Professor Gore in 2018. So, and also various on Africa, various African countries, they have country specific volumes have been brought. So it would be wonderful if you can take a look at this. And I also want to thank Professor Gore, who has been an inspiration, and I'm basically his student, and what I am today, he is because of his guidance, inspiration.
No, you are too humble to say that.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
sir.